When his grandfather passed away, Ethan believed the $35,000 inheritance would be his chance to finally start building a life of his own. What he didn't know was that his parents had already spent it, every single dollar, on his sister's dream wedding. It all started with a phone call that changed everything. Ethan was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in accounting, still trying to figure out how to stand on his own 2 feet. He had always been the quiet, dependable son, the one who didn't complain, who did what he was told, who trusted his parents to make the right decisions. His mother, Laura, was 48, warm on the surface but fiercely protective of appearances. His father, David, 50, had spent his life working long shifts at a manufacturing plant, coming home exhausted but proud that he could provide. And then there was Sophie, 25, beautiful, ambitious, and the kind of daughter parents bragged about to everyone they knew. People used to say the Callahan family looked picture perfect, but behind those family photos, the smiles, the Christmas cards, the Sunday dinners, there was an imbalance no one ever said out loud. Everyone knew Sophie was the favorite. She got the car at 16, the private college, the lavish birthday parties. Ethan, on the other hand, was the responsible one. He got lectures about saving money and learning the value of hard work. Ethan didn't mind, at least not at first. He respected his parents, and he adored his grandfather, Henry Callahan. Henry was the kind of man who taught with actions, not words. When Ethan was a boy, Henry showed him how to fish, how to fix things around the house, how to be patient when life got unfair. He was more of a father figure than David ever had time to be. And before he passed, Henry had told Ethan something that stuck with him. "I've saved a little something for you, kid. It's not much, but it's yours for when you're ready to start your life." That little something turned out to be $35,000, a fortune to a 19-year-old still in college. After Henry's funeral, Laura and David took care of the paperwork, the will, the accounts. They said the probate process would take some time, and Ethan, grieving and buried in his sophomore studies, didn't question it. He trusted them completely. "We'll hold the money for you," Laura had said. "Until you graduate, it'll be safer that way." For years, Ethan never asked about it. He believed his parents, because why wouldn't he? They were family. Family didn't lie about things like that. But after graduation, when he came home to save money before getting his own place, small cracks began to show. Laura and David started talking about Sophie's engagement, how she had finally found the one. A man named Ryan who worked in finance and made her feel like a princess. Ethan was happy for her. He really was. But soon, every dinner conversation turned into wedding talk, venues, catering, floral arrangements, and budgets that made Ethan's stomach tighten. 40 to 50,000, David said one night, tapping his calculator like it was no big deal. Ethan glanced up from his plate. "You're spending 50 grand on a wedding?" His father just shrugged. "We've been saving for years. It's her big day." Laura chimed in with that tone mothers use when they don't want to be questioned. "It's family money, Ethan. Don't worry about it." But Ethan did worry. Their combined income barely reached $75,000 a year. They still had a mortgage. His mother worked part-time at a clinic. There was no way they could afford a $50,000 wedding without dipping into something that night. Ethan lay awake thinking about his grandfather's inheritance. It had been years since anyone mentioned it. Maybe, he thought, it was finally time to use a portion of it, maybe as a down payment for his own apartment. The next morning, over coffee, he brought it up gently. "Mum, about Grandpa's money, the one he left for me. Do you think it's ready?" Laura didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, honey, not yet. There are still some tax issues we're sorting out." "It's complicated. Tax issues. After 3 years?" he asked. David folded his newspaper slowly, eyes narrowing. "Ethan, these things take time. You're not a lawyer. Just trust us, all right?" The way he said it, sharp, final, made Ethan feel small, like a child again. So, he nodded and let it go. But something about it didn't sit right. Weeks passed. The wedding planning got more extravagant. A $3,000 gown, a $15,000 reception hall, endless fittings and tastings and meetings with photographers. Every week, his parents seemed to spend more, while Ethan's simple questions about his inheritance were met with new excuses. "Still in legal review. We're waiting on investment clearance. It's not a good time to move the funds." It was always something for the first time in his life. Ethan began to suspect that maybe, just maybe, his parents weren't being honest. But he pushed that thought away, because the alternative was too painful to believe. These were his parents, the two people he trusted most in the world. They wouldn't steal from him. They couldn't, at least. That's what he told himself until the night his sister's engagement. party turned into the first crack in everything he thought he knew about family. When Sophie's engagement party ended that night, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had cracked open. The small unease he'd been carrying for months was now a dull ache in his chest, something he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. He told himself it was nothing, just nerves, exhaustion, maybe jealousy, and pushed it down. Weeks later, that ache turned into something far worse. The day of Sophie's wedding arrived like a movie scene. Rows of white chairs lined the vineyard, a string quartet played softly, and the air was thick with laughter and champagne bubbles. Laura looked radiant in navy blue, beaming with pride. David wore a suit Ethan had never seen before, tailored, expensive, and stood tall, greeting guests like a man who had just bought happiness for his family. Ethan sat near the back, his tie slightly crooked, clapping when everyone else did, smiling when expected, but deep down, he felt like a stranger watching a play he hadn't auditioned for. He watched as Sophie glided down the aisle, her dress shimmering under the setting sun. Everything looked perfect, too perfect for a family that couldn't possibly afford all of it. When the ceremony ended, the reception came alive. Laughter, music, endless toasts. Ethan tried to blend in, talking to cousins he barely knew, sipping wine that tasted far too expensive. He was trying to be the good son again, supportive, polite, invisible. That was when Aunt Diane appeared beside him, holding a glass of champagne and smiling. "Your parents really went all out," she said, her tone a mix of pride and disbelief. "Yeah," Ethan replied softly. "It's beautiful." She nodded. "Your grandfather would have been so proud, using his money to make Sophie's day perfect. Well, he'd be smiling right now." Ethan froze. The words barely registered at first, like static through the noise of the party. But once they did, everything around him blurred. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp. Diane blinked, confused. "Oh, you didn't know? Laura mentioned that Henry left some money for you kids, and they decided to use part of it for the wedding. I assumed you agreed to it." The noise in Ethan's head turned to a roar. He smiled politely, excused himself, and walked out to the edge of the vineyard where the lights faded into darkness. The music behind him grew distant, muffled, as if it belonged to another world. He stood there for a long time, staring at the stars, feeling something inside him shatter completely. It wasn't about the money, not anymore. It was the realization that the two people he had trusted more than anyone had taken something that wasn't theirs, something his grandfather had given him with love and intention. When he finally walked back into the reception, everything looked different. The laughter sounded hollow, the music false. His parents danced with Sophie, smiling like nothing in the world was wrong. That night, he drove home in silence. His parents came home later, tipsy and glowing from the celebration. Laura kicked off her heels and sighed. Wasn't it magical? Ethan's voice was calm, too calm. "Where did the money come from, Mum?" David glanced up, annoyed. "What money?" "The inheritance," Ethan said slowly. "The money Grandpa left me. Aunt Diane said you used it for the wedding." The air in the room changed instantly. Laura froze. David's jaw clenched. "That's ridiculous." David snapped. "Your aunt must have misunderstood." Ethan didn't blink, did she? Laura tried to speak, her voice trembling. "Honey, it's not what you think. We just used my inheritance," Ethan finished for her. "Didn't you?" She began to cry. The kind of crying that sounded rehearsed, soft, careful, full of guilt but no accountability. "We were going to pay you back," she whispered. "After the honeymoon, we needed the money right away for deposits and planning. You weren't using it anyway." Ethan stared at her, disbelief and hurt mixing in his chest. "You mean you decided to take it without asking me?" David slammed his hand on the table. "What's your tone? That money was part of the family estate. It wasn't like it was sitting in your hand. It was meant for me," Ethan said quietly. "Grandpa told me himself. He wanted me to use it to start my life." David scoffed. "Your sister's wedding is part of this family's life. You're not the only one Henry cared about." Ethan's voice grew colder, but he didn't leave it to you, or to Sophie. David leaned forward, his face hard. "You're living under our roof, eating our food, paying barely anything in rent. Don't you dare lecture me about who deserves what." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. He felt like a child again, small, powerless, wrong. But this time, the anger didn't fade. It burned steady, clear. "So that's it," he said finally. "You steal my inheritance, spend it on a wedding, and somehow I'm the ungrateful one." Laura sobbed harder. "Don't say it like that. We didn't steal from you. We borrowed it. We just wanted Sophie to have her special day. You'll understand one day when you have kids." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, Mom, I won't. because I'd never steal from my child and then make him feel guilty for caring. David stood up, towering over him. If you're so miserable here, then leave. You think you're the only one struggling. Grow up, Ethan. Life isn't fair. Get over it. There was a long silence. Then Ethan nodded once, expression unreadable. All right, he said quietly. He went to his room, packed a small bag, just the essentials, and left without another word. As he closed the door behind him, Laura's sobs filled the hallway. David muttered something about teaching him a lesson, but Ethan didn't listen. He was done being taught. Driving through the empty streets, Ethan realized something with painful clarity. His parents had never planned to repay him. The stories about taxes and legal issues, the excuses about family money, they were all lies meant to buy time. They never intended to give it back, and for the first time he saw them for who they really were, not the loving, overworked parents he'd defended all his life, but to people who valued Sophie's happiness more than his trust, more than his future, more than the promise his grandfather had left behind. It wasn't about $35,000, it was about the line they'd crossed and the part of him they'd taken that he would never get back. As he drove toward his friend Jake's apartment, headlights slicing through the darkness, Ethan made himself a silent promise. He would find out exactly what they'd done. He would uncover every lie they'd told, and when he was ready, he would take back more than the money. He would take back control of his life. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He drove 4 hours until the city lights blurred into endless streaks of gold and red, until exhaustion finally forced him to stop at an empty parking lot near a gas station. The betrayal still echoed in his head, every word, every excuse, every tear that felt like a performance. By dawn, he had made up his mind. He wasn't going back. He moved in with Jake, his closest friend since college. Jake didn't ask for details, just handed him a spare key and said, "You can stay as long as you need." Man, the silence was comforting. For the first few days, Ethan barely spoke. He went to work, came home, and stared at the ceiling at night, trying to make sense of how everything had fallen apart so easily. But grief has a way of hardening into something else, something colder. And by the end of that week, Ethan's silence became focus. He began collecting documents, bank statements, old emails, anything that could trace the inheritance his grandfather had left him. He contacted the lawyer who had handled Henry Callahan's estate, pretending it was just for record-keeping. The man remembered him instantly. Henry was a good man, the lawyer said over the phone. He left specific instructions about that inheritance, wanted it kept separate, solely in your name. Ethan's stomach twisted. Separate? So it wasn't part of my parents' accounts? Of course not. It was under a beneficiary fund. You should have received a letter, actually. I sent one through your parents right after the estate was settled. A letter? Ethan's chest went cold. I never got a letter, he said quietly. There was a pause on the line, the kind that makes truth heavier than words. That's strange, the lawyer murmured. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan signed the acknowledgement of receipt. When the call ended, Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. His parents hadn't just spent his inheritance, they had hidden the proof that it was his to begin with. That night he called Aunt Diane. Her voice softened when she heard what had happened. "Oh, Ethan," she sighed. "I shouldn't have said anything at the wedding. I just assumed you knew." "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "But I need to know something. Did Grandpa ever mention a letter?" Diane hesitated. "He did. I saw him write it, actually. It was short," he said. "It was for you, just in case there were misunderstandings later. He even sealed it himself. Your father promised he'd give it to you." Ethan closed his eyes, a mixture of rage and disbelief coursing through him. "Thank you, Aunt Diane." After the call, the silence of Jake's apartment felt suffocating. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint music from the streets seemed to mock him. He wasn't just dealing with lost money anymore. This was deliberate, calculated. A few days later, he got a message from a number he didn't recognize. "Ethan, this is Frank Callahan. I'm your father's brother. We need to talk about Henry's accounts." Ethan had only met his Uncle Frank a few times growing up. Frank was the black sheep of the family, the one who spoke his mind, who didn't always agree with David's family-first philosophy. They met at a small diner 2 towns over. Frank looked older than Ethan remembered, but his eyes were sharp, searching. "I heard what happened," he said. "Your aunt told me." Ethan nodded. "Then you know they took it." Frank sighed heavily. "They took more than that." He pulled out a folder, worn at the edges. Inside were printed statements from a financial account Ethan didn't recognize. "Henry set up an investment fund when you were 16. Started small, grew over time. By the time he passed, it was worth about $60,000. Ethan's throat tightened. "That's impossible." I never knew about it. Frank pushed the papers closer. That's because your parents closed it, transferred most of it into their joint savings. There's only about 15 grand left. Ethan stared at the numbers, disbelief giving way to anger. The digits glared back at him like an accusation. His parents hadn't just crossed a line, they'd destroyed it entirely. They've taken over $80,000 from me, Ethan whispered. Frank nodded. I wish I could say I'm surprised. Your father's pride has always been bigger than his sense of right and wrong. For a moment, neither spoke. The diner buzzed with the sound of clinking dishes and murmured conversations. Then Frank said quietly, if you want, I'll go with you. He won't face what he's done unless someone else is there. Ethan met his uncle's eyes. Yeah, he said softly. Let's finish this. The confrontation happened on a rainy afternoon. Laura opened the door first, her face pale, her hands trembling. Ethan, she whispered. Please, is Dad home? He asked, his tone even. David appeared from the hallway, eyes narrowing when he saw Frank behind him. What's this about? Frank didn't bother with pleasantries. He dropped the folder onto the kitchen table. You know exactly what it's about, David. The accounts. The inheritance. The letter you signed. Laura's lip quivered. David's jaw tightened. I don't have to explain myself to you. Ethan's voice was calm but cold. Then explain it to me. You stole over $80,000 that was legally mine. David laughed once, short, bitter. Legally yours. You think you earned that money. Henry wanted it to benefit the family. He told me that himself. Frank cut in sharply. No, he didn't. I was there when he signed the will, David. It was meant for Ethan alone. You twisted his wishes for your own comfort. Laura broke down then, her hands shaking as tears spilled over. We didn't mean to hurt you, Ethan. We just wanted to help Sophie. She was getting married. She needed it more. Ethan's expression didn't change. You decided that for me. You took something that wasn't yours and called it love. David's composure cracked. Don't stand there and act righteous. We raised you. We fed you. You think a few $1,000s makes you a victim. Ethan took a deep breath, every word deliberate. It wasn't a few thousand, and it wasn't about the money. It was about trust, the one thing you were supposed to protect, not destroy. The silence that followed was deafening. Rain tapped against the windows. Frank looked between them, disappointment etched deep in his face. Ethan slid a document across the table, a printed summary from the bank showing the remaining balance of $15,000. Transfer this to my account, he said, then start a repayment plan for the rest. I don't care how long it takes. You'll make it right. Laura sobbed harder. David stared at the paper like it was poison. You're really doing this? He asked, voice low with disbelief. You'd humiliate your own parents over money. Ethan met his father's eyes. His voice was quiet but sharp as glass. You already did that when you stole my future. For a second, David looked like he might hit him. Then his shoulders dropped, and the fight went out of him. Ethan turned to leave. Laura reached out, her voice breaking. Ethan, please. He paused at the door but didn't look back. You didn't just take my money, he said softly. You took away the part of me that believed you'd never lie. And with that, he walked out into the rain. Frank followed him to the car, shaking his head. You did what you had to, he said quietly. Ethan didn't answer. He just stared out at the storm, water streaking down the windshield like glass tears. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt clean, because now he understood sometimes. Walking away isn't running from the past. It's reclaiming your future. The rain had stopped by the time Ethan reached his apartment. The city lights shimmered off the wet pavement, reflecting fragments of everything he had just left behind. A house that no longer felt like home. To people who no longer felt like parents. For the first time in years, the silence inside his car didn't hurt. It just was. The days that followed were strangely calm. He didn't call them, they didn't call him. He went to work, came home, and focused on rebuilding the kind of peace that didn't depend on anyone else. But word traveled fast. Within a week the rest of the family knew. Aunt Diane called to check on him, her tone soft but proud. Uncle Frank texted occasionally to make sure the repayment process had started. And it had slowly, painfully. Laura had gone to the bank, trying to take out a second mortgage on the house to repay part of what they owed. But their credit was already stretched thin from the wedding and unpaid loans. The bank denied her request. Sophie, guilt-ridden after learning what happened, tried selling some of her wedding gifts, the designer coffee machine, the diamond bracelet, even her honeymoon jewelry, but it barely made a dent. David didn't take the humiliation well. Frank had exposed the truth at a family gathering after one too many glasses of wine. And suddenly everyone knew what he and Laura had done. The proud, stoic father who once preached about integrity was now the man who stole from his own son. He stopped answering calls, stopped showing up at work for a few days. Pride, Ethan realized, had finally come full circle, and it was eating his father alive. But Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted distance. Weeks passed. The first repayment arrived, $5,000 transferred to his account. The message from Laura came minutes later. "This is all we can do for now. We'll keep trying. Please don't hate us." He stared at the screen for a long moment before replying simply, "I don't hate you, but I can't trust you again." It was the truth, and for the first time, that truth didn't feel cruel. It felt necessary. Life slowly began to move forward. Ethan found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. One bedroom, a narrow balcony overlooking the street. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. He used part of the recovered money to furnish it. Nothing extravagant, just enough to make it feel alive. Every item he bought, a couch, a lamp, a desk, felt like a symbol of independence. Jake came by one evening with pizza and 2 beers. "Feels good, doesn't it?" he said, looking around the new space. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, it's quiet, too quiet," Jake teased. "Not anymore," Ethan said. "Silence used to mean loneliness. Now it just means freedom." They ate in comfortable quiet. It was strange how pain, when faced head-on, could leave behind something cleaner, stronger. By the end of the month, Laura sent another payment. Then Sophie called. Her voice trembled the way it used to when she was little and afraid of storms. "Ethan, I didn't know," she said. "I swear I didn't. Mum and Dad, they told me Grandpa's money was theirs to use. I never would have agreed if I knew." "I believe you," he said softly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wish I could undo it." "You can't," Ethan said gently. "But you can learn from it. That's more than they ever did." After the call, he felt lighter, not because things were fixed. They never truly would be, but because he no longer carried the weight of anger for someone else's mistakes. Months later, Ethan's life settled into a rhythm. Work was steady. His savings slowly grew. He started volunteering at a local youth program, teaching basic financial literacy, helping kids understand the value of honesty and money before life taught them the hard way. One afternoon, one of the teens asked why he cared so much about teaching responsibility. Ethan smiled faintly. "Because someone once taught me what happens when you forget it," he said. That night, he sat by the window of his apartment, watching the city lights flicker like stars. He thought about his grandfather, the quiet afternoons fishing by the lake. The rough hands had always smelled faintly of cedar and oil. He imagined what Henry would say if he were here. Probably something simple. Something like, "Proud of you, kid. You figured it out." The thought made him smile. He realized then that justice doesn't always look like a courtroom or a confrontation. Sometimes it's just the choice to stop chasing people who broke your trust, to stop bleeding for those who wouldn't do the same for you. They had stolen his inheritance. Yes, but in doing so, they had given him something far more valuable: clarity. "They stole my inheritance," he thought, "but they also freed me from ever needing their approval again." It was a quiet truth, but it filled the room with warmth. Time kept moving. The debt his parents owed dwindled, bit by bit, until it stopped altogether. There was no final apology, no grand reconciliation, just distance, clean, mutual, and peaceful. Ethan didn't attend family holidays anymore. He sent Sophie a birthday card each year, sometimes a small gift for her kids later on. But Laura and David remained shadows, present in memory, absent in life. He didn't hate them, he just released them. Years later, standing in his small but bright apartment, now fully paid off, Ethan opened a box he hadn't touched in a long time. Inside was an old photo, him and his grandfather by the lake, holding a fishing rod twice his size. Behind the photo was a note he'd written to himself months after everything fell apart that said, "Integrity is the only inheritance that truly matters." He placed the note on his desk, right beside the framed photo of Henry Callahan, and smiled. Because in the end, his grandfather's legacy wasn't money. It was the lesson that some things, honesty, peace, are worth more than any dollar amount. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, filling the room with golden light, Ethan realized something else. He had finally stopped surviving his past. He was living his future. Thank you for listening to Ethan's story. If it resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us bring more real, emotional stories every week. Remember, sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's strength, and every story has the power to inspire. Share your thoughts or your own story in the comments. Your voice matters.